If someone created for us a SharePoint environment and handed us the keys and gave us the URL to start working with it, where would we begin? In this nugget, we're going to address that directly by creating our first team site and then take a look at the interface and where the controls are on that first website that we create in SharePoint. Let's begin. I'd like you to imagine that you and I work for Acme Incorporated just for a moment, and the IT department there has configured an on-site SharePoint server with all the ingredients. The SQL server is installed, the IIS is installed, everything's ready to go, and they gave us a URL and said, here you go. Now the question might be, where do we go from there? Well, one of the first things we might want to do, if it hasn't been done for us already by IT, is to create our very first website, our very first web portal that users can use as part of SharePoint. And to facilitate that, in this nugget, we're going to do three basic things. One, I'd like to introduce you to the topology and the online labs that we can use to do hands-on practice as we go through this together, and introduce the admin web portal that we can use to administer SharePoint from our browser. And then third, how to create a website. And instead of building everything on the web page from scratch, we can use a set of templates. And one of the most common templates for building a new site is the team template in SharePoint. That puts a lot of what you might already need on that web page so you don't have to drag it in and bring it in from scratch. So let's begin with the lab topology first. So I'm going to draw right here a network. Looks like an Ethernet network from olden times. And let's put our SharePoint server on the left. We'll call it SP. Its name is SRV1. And on that same network segment, we've got a Windows 10 machine, which is going to be acting as our client. Now this network segment is 192.168.1.0/24. And the SharePoint, because it's running 2016 server, I gave it the IP address of 216. So the last two digits represent 16 to help remind us what the IP address is. And on the Windows 10 machine, the last octet of its IP address is .210. So the last two digits there are 10, which represent the Windows 10 machine. So those are the two machines that we're going to use in our lab. This SharePoint server right here is loaded to the hilt with SQL Server, IIS, Active Directory, SharePoint. And in a production environment, we'd very likely separate many of those services off into separate machines. But in the lab environment that you get to practice with, I have all of that running in one nice little package. And to access the online labs, it's really simple. You'd log on to CBT Nuggets, log in as your user account, and over on the right, once you get to this course, there will be a link to launch the labs. And that'll launch in a new window, a separate lab environment, so you can go ahead and not only watch and enjoy this video, but you also get the opportunity to get hands-on practice to reinforce those concepts that we've talked about. So in a moment, we'll bring up the lab environment, and going back to our scenario, if we're at a company and the IT department said, hey, your SharePoint server is up, we'd want to know what the admin web portal address is. So in our example, if we're sitting at this computer, the IP address of the server we're going to connect to via our browser is going to be 192.168.1.216. That's our SharePoint server's IP address. And the port number that the IT folks decided to use was 6783. So when they set up SharePoint, they chose an unused port number just for the administrative purposes. And for this installation, I chose 6783. In a production environment, they may have chosen a different number. So the people who installed SharePoint would have to tell you what that port number is to go ahead and connect to the administrative portal for SharePoint. Also, there is a username named administrator. And the lab password that I'm using is NUGGET!23. So from our Windows 10 machine, we'll open up a browser, we'll connect to this IP address and port, and we'll log in as administrator with this password. And then once there, I'll walk you through the steps of clicking on a few links to create the website. Now, if it's our very first website, it's going to be part of a site collection. So we can think of a site collection as a collection of sites, and the root site, we can go ahead and give it a name. Let's call it Acme Inc. Root. And then later, if we want to, we can create subsites for our various departments. For example, HR and engineering and sales. So we'll save the subsites for a subsequent nugget. But when we create sites in general, we have a template to choose from to make it easier to get started with using that site. And we'll use the team template to do that. And as you and I enjoy going through these nuggets together, I would encourage you to do it in this fashion. Number one, watch the video first, and then secondly, watch it again, but pause it as you open up the lab environment using the link to the right from the CBT Nuggets website. And then you can walk through the individual steps and get that hands-on practice. Without further ado, let's open up the lab environment and create our root site in our site collection. So in the lab environment, over here on the right-hand side, we have a representation of our two systems. We have SP Server 1, and we have down here Windows 10. If you click on either one of those, it'll switch over here on the left-hand side to represent that virtual machine. So with the Windows 10 machine selected, let's go ahead and log in right here. And our username for this computer, we have a username called Bob and a password of our lab password of Nugget !23. And Bob does have administrator rights on this local machine. So we'll log in as Bob with our password. And if you get this message over here on the right regarding, do you want this computer to be discoverable on your network? You don't have to respond to that. You can just click anywhere on the desktop and that message will go away. Or if you click yes or no on that dialog box, it won't have an impact on the lab. So let's open up a browser and let's go ahead and open up Edge using this icon right here. And let's go ahead and put in the URL that we want to connect to, which is http://192.168.1.216. And then our port number was 6783. Now I do have DNS services that are running on that Windows system, but just to help confirm where things are, I'm using the IP address for now to help show you explicitly who we're connecting to and what the IP address is. So we are sitting at the Windows 10 computer. We're connecting to the Windows 2016 server on the port 6783, and we'll press enter. And we'll give that just a couple moments to go ahead and come up. It's asking us to authenticate. So we're going to authenticate at the SharePoint server with the username administrator with our lab password of NUGGET!23 with the capital N at the very beginning of that. And click on OK. And we'll give that a moment to load as well. So we are now connected as administrator to the central web administration page for SharePoint. And what we're going to do is we're going to create our very first site collection. And to do that, we're going to click on Create Site Collections right here. And for the title, let's call this Acme Incorporated Root Site. Just so when we see it, we'll know exactly what it is. And for the description, let me go ahead and copy the title with a Control-C, go down to description, do a Control-V, and I'm just going to add the word description. And what I've discovered is that as you're learning a brand new technology and the interfaces and the options, if you can put a lot of meaning into the titles, that way when you see them, you realize where they came from. Let's go ahead and scroll down just a little bit. For the URL, I'm going to leave the default of SRV1. So a user, whether they connect to the DNS name, which resolves to an IP address, or they connect to the IP address itself, that'll connect them to this root site. Now, in a later nugget, when we create subsites, we can have specific and different URLs for each of those subsites. And at that point, we'll take advantage of that URL field and we'll add additional URL information for the specific subsite. For now, we'll leave that as its default and we'll scroll down a little bit more. Next, it's asking about which template do we want to use to start or create this new site. And the most popular site in all of SharePoint is the team site. By using a template, we're getting a head start on the creation of the layout for the pages on that site. So we'll go ahead and accept the default of team site and we'll scroll down a little bit further. Next, it's asking who is going to be the primary site collection administrator. So we can click on the directory icon over here. We can browse for a user. And I'm going to type in admin, press enter. And because SharePoint is running on top of Active Directory, there is only one match with the letters admin in it, and that was the administrator. So we'll simply select administrator and assign administrator as our site collection administrator. Now, if we had other users that we wanted to, like Bob or Lois or Sam or anybody else that was in Active Directory, here's where we would assign that individual the responsibilities of the site collection administrator. So with administrator selected, we'll go ahead and click on OK. And we could have a secondary site collection administrator if we wanted to as well. If we continue to scroll down, we can select a quota template. And quotas could be a good thing. If we give an individual user the ability to set up their own personal site, we might want to put some quotas in place so they don't overrun the system. For now, we'll leave the quota off for the root site and we'll click on OK. And we'll give that a few moments to churn and crank it out. It gives us a little message saying it's working on it. And in your environment, it could be faster or slower depending on the number of servers and how they're configured on the back end that are providing the SharePoint services. And I've discovered, at least in the lab environment, that when it creates the first root site in a site collection, it does take a few minutes in this lab environment to crank it out. There's a lot of pieces and parts that it's putting together to create that for us. All right, and it says it's done. It says the new top-level site was created successfully with the specified URL right here. So basically, anybody going to that host at 192.168.1.216:80, which is the default port for HTTP, are going to land at the root site or the top level site in that site collection. So we'll go ahead and say OK to that. And we could open up another tab here and actually connect to it that way, or we could use a separate browser just to keep them kind of separate. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and I'm going to minimize Edge, and let's go ahead and launch Chrome from the same Windows 10 machine. So here in Chrome, I'll expand that full screen. And let's go to 192.168.1.216. For some reason, my keypad and the numlock isn't cooperating with me. If that happens for you, just feel free to use the number keys at the top of your keyboard. That's what I'm doing right now. And port 80 is the default port for HTTP, so I'll go ahead and press enter. And that should take us to the root site, that top level site, from a user perspective with SharePoint. So it wants me to log on. Now, I'm going to log on as administrator. But after we get it set up and we have other users who are authorized to access this site, we could also log in as additional user accounts as well. So the username is administrator and the password is nugget, !23 with that capital N at the very beginning, and we'll press enter to log on. I've also noticed that the very first time that we log on to SharePoint to one of the new sites, it may take a moment or so for that to initially come up. So I've got a message from the server saying working on it. That's great. And I've also got a little pop-up from Chrome saying, do we want to save this password? And I'm going to say, no, I don't want to save the password. And it is now done. So this new site is ready. As a result of using the team template, it automatically gave us an area for documents. There's a newsfeed area. And because it's a new site, it has also a bunch of shortcuts that can assist us in creating and working with the site and getting it the way we want it to be. So let's talk just briefly about some of the areas that we'll commonly be using on a SharePoint site. Up here we have the tabs for the SharePoint ribbon. If you're already familiar with Microsoft Office products, this won't be new to you. For example, if we click on the Page tab, it brings up a ribbon with many of the relevant options that we could apply to this page. If we go back and click on the Browse tab, it's going to give us the browse view of that page. Up here, these navigation links up at the top, you'll never guess what they're called. You got it, top navigation. And normally the links here are going to be within this site collection, but it's not limited to that. We can edit and configure those links to go anywhere that we want them to go. And this area right here is called the top navigation area. Over here on the left, we have some additional hyperlinks, and this is called the quick launch area. And these links, although not restricted to do it, they usually are going to be links within this current site. Up here in the upper right, we have an icon to share. If we wanted to share this page or this site with other individuals, we click on share to initiate that process. As a user, if we're visiting a page and we want to find that very easy in the future, we can go ahead and follow that page using the follow option right here in the upper right hand corner. Assuming we have the permissions to do so, we have an edit option right here that we can use to edit a page. And once we're in edit mode, once we're making changes, we can then click on save to save those changes. This icon right here in the upper right hand corner allows us to focus on content. What it'll basically do is remove the navigation part so we can focus just on the web page. Then once we're there, we can click on that icon again to once again show the navigation links. There's a search field, and these getting started tiles, we can remove them with a simple click. Simply click remove this. If we wanted to bring them back later, we could go ahead and click on the gear icon and add the getting started back in. These are simply hyperlinks that will allow us to initiate the process of sharing a site or adding tasks and calendars or customizing the style or adding additional content to our pages like apps, which could include lists and libraries. Down here, because we selected the team site template, we have a newsfeed area, which can be used for sharing information or ideas among the people who use this team site. And in the documents area, also here because we chose a team site, we have the option for uploading and storing and saving documents. And we'll have lots more practice and exposure to these parts as we work with the interface. But for now, I'd like you to remember that this top area right here is called top navigation, And the area over here on the left is called Quick Launch. And you'll become more comfortable and more familiar with these interfaces the more we go through these nuggets together and the more hands-on practice you do with them. In this nugget, we've done 3 basic things. We've introduced the 2 virtual machines as part of the lab environment and how to access the web portal on the SharePoint server using the custom port 6783. We also walked through creating an initial site collection using the team template. And then third, we went through an overview of the interface for our first team site that we just created. I'm glad that you joined me for this nugget, and I encourage you to practice what you've seen in the hands-on lab that are part of your membership here at CBT Nuggets. And I look forward to seeing you in the next nugget. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.